discussion will enable you to respond uh, uh, to that uh, uh, consultation by the Ministry of Health and, in a sense, contribute to the democratic process of policy making that we have in our country. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Kwan Advisory and the Center for Communications Governance at the National Law University, Delhi, for the support for this discussion. Uh, so, online streaming platforms, or OTT as they're called, are facing a bit of a regulatory burden that sort of blurs the line between uh, public broadcast and private viewing. And these new health regulations imposed by the Ministry of Health essentially requires streaming services to play or to display non-skippable tobacco health warnings as well as static disclaimers um, in their content. And these rules mandate a 30-second warning before and during films. And they're sort of reminiscent of broadcast television regulations and a bit of traditional cinema regulations, but neither equal to neither. Um, and essentially, still not, in my opinion, taking into account the fundamentally different nature of online streaming as a medium. Now, streaming services have been viewed as a private experience, distinct from cinema and television, and yet, despite this distinction, um, the online streaming industry hasn't pushed back forcefully enough, or it didn't push back forcefully enough when the Ministry of Electronics and IT sought to regulate them under the IT rules as online curated content platforms. In my view, that started a slippery slope, and we are on that slippery slope today, slipping ever so consistently as more and more regulations come in. Um, and so today we're left questioning whether, these particular warnings on tobacco are truly necessary, or are they an exercise in sort of bureaucratic mandate, because every ministry has its own mandate, and they see things from their own lens. And so this is there an urgent need to regulate and to put tobacco warnings on online streaming, or is it a part of the Ministry of Health broad mandate to address public health issues irrespective of the medium? And I'm left with a question about how much they understand the medium and how much they're willing to understand the medium, because we don't really see much of an improvement or that significant increase in level of understanding compared to what we saw last year. Because the ministry's solution is non-skippable health warnings before all content for at least 30 seconds, non-skippable health warnings when someone opens up a platform for about 20 seconds. And in case of films, it applies to films that, where films released after September 1st, 2023, um, and present on online streaming services must carry an anti-tobacco health spot for at least 30 seconds each at the beginning and the middle of the runtime. And then films have to carry a prominent static anti-tobacco health warning at the bottom of the screen when someone's viewing a tobacco product on screen. So should the regulations be adapted to the medium or the other way around? And this is among the questions that we'll explore today, whether the medium has to adapt or the regulations have to adapt, or both. And our format will include an initial round of conversations with each of our panelists, followed by an open Q&A where we encourage you who are attending to ask questions and share your thoughts. We have with us Mr. Rakesh Maheshwari, a former senior director and group coordinator at METI, who will provide insights from a regulatory standpoint and how regulators think, and particularly in this case, and he was the architect of the IT rules. Rahul Mitra joins us. He's a renowned filmmaker, a film producer who will speak about how these rules affect the industry's creativity and production processes. Um, Gauri Gokhale is an independent legal counsel and advisor with expertise in media law and at the intersection of regulation and technology. Arundeep is the principal correspondent of The Hindu, who's been closely following and reporting on the development of these rules. But before everything else, Arun is a consumer of streaming content and thinks deeply about censorships, cuts in films, and how creative content is regulated online, and tracks the censor board quite closely, in fact. Um, I'll start with Mr. Mitra. Rahul, I just wanted to understand that as a filmmaker, how do you view different media differently, and how do you view the treatment of these anti-tobacco ads? Whether that should be the same if the content and viewership is also the same.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's nice to be with the panelists and talking on a very, very pertinent and important issue. And I'm glad I'm here with you. See, I think you've in your introduction when you were talking, I think you said it very clearly that um, cinema, OTT, and television, as we all know, are different mass communication tools. They are different in terms of the medium, how they reach out to the target audience, and price, the target group, and the experience. More importantly, as we all know, television and cinema, I think, is generally cinema is a more immersive kind of an experience where we're all sitting, and OTT. I'm just reminded of something from my childhood. When I was growing up in Chandigarh, as a kid, after my sports, I would go running to the biggest shop around to ask for candy, or I would attend chores or whatever I was supposed to do. I would never go. I will generally go and say, "Sabun dena," I mean, give me a soap or give me oil. And it was supposed to be the prerogative of that uncle standing there, or that auntie, or whoever was behind the counter, to hand over whatever that I wanted. Right? I had no say unless my mother would note down and say, I need this particular thing. Then what happened? We just had the big malls came, and we were handed a basket. Now, what that basket did was essentially empower the people getting in there. So I could then pick up a particular brand and keep the other back if I don't like it. The choice came in the hand of people. I think that is what OTT has done. And that is how it is completely different from cinema. In cinema, there's a particular show time. Of course, you can broadly choose which film to see or whatever, but once you are in the cinema hall, there's an immersive experience. OTT is customized. It's a very personalized experience. And hence is the reason to ponder for all the regulatory authorities that I think it should be treated differently. That's one. Second, I myself been a heavy smoker most of my for I think more than 2 decades probably, and I'm very happy to tell you that the last cigarette that I smoked was on the sets of my Netflix film Torbaz when I was shooting in Kyrgyzstan. So anyway, so I am personally, I understand the perils of smoking, and I understand it's not a good thing. And all of us should take up measures. But it's very important to understand how you are disseminating the information. I think that is the key, which we need to understand.
So, in terms of you agree that the medium is different, but so how should the treatment be different? Should we look at the cinema approach? Should we look at we don't have these warnings on television, do we? Or they just get cut? What should the approach be for online streaming? And is the current approach fine, where there's an initial splash screen of a warning every time you start a show or something? What should be the approach? Should we even have anti-tobacco warnings for that matter?
See, anti-tobacco warnings should definitely be there, because it is it is a peril that is in society affecting too many people, essentially the youth. And I think the target group is very clear for all anti. I mean, I also don a hat of a branding guy. My company Brandsmith has rolled out some campaigns even for state government. So I think advertising the The rule is very simple. You got to connect with the person. Now, when you're connecting, you need to understand the audience that which you're connecting with. Otherwise, your message will go for a toss. In cinema hall, we understand all of us were there. It's an immersive experience. You show the strong imagery, and it's probably done. It's although I'm again that's another discussion that whether the anti smoking ads are effective. That's another discussion. We'll probably keep it for another day or later on today. But more importantly, each time I am switching on my OTT platform and I have an anti-smoking campaign, I don't think there is a requirement for that. Yes, if you start, why? Because if I switch on to another platform and then I'm switching back and I again see that ad. So the idea is to connect. The idea is not to desensitize the audience. The idea is not to shun them away or to look the other way that, oh my God, it's mandatory now, 20 seconds. Okay, get over with it. No, that's not the idea. The advertising has to do its job. And hence, I feel that the regulatory authorities have to, like I said, understand the difference, the people who are getting in, who are watching this content. You do the warning, but too much of it and in the face and showing those strong imagery when you are watching something. What about a kid who's logging on, for instance, to or somebody who's too young, who's and then you get something like that the moment it comes. So I think we need to identify the target group, like I said, and too much of it is not effective at all. I think less is more. I would say, I mean, less is more. It should be important that how you are putting across that message rather than making it so repetitive. If I'm binge watching, then what happens? Each episode, last night I was watching something, 4 episodes, and imagine with every episode, I mean, and non-skippable, because I don't want to know what happened in the last episode because I'm binge watching it. I know I've just watched it a few minutes back. So what am I going to do? When the next episode comes, I'm going to quickly click on the credits and move ahead so as to make it the whole process engaging, because I don't want to turn away because it's a very personalized experience. And what happens if I'm shown that same imagery again?
The flow breaks.
So am I in the mood to receive that also? I don't think so. That's where I think there's a disconnect.
Just less is more is interesting. Mr. Maheshwari, when you created the IT rules, you did have requirements for disclosures, including for tobacco, etc. Yes. So that was less. We're moving not only to more, but much, much more now with repeat warnings. And so do you think that there is a need for 30-second, 20-second these kind of ads, maybe graphic ads on streaming platforms? Or do you think that what you had mandated in terms of disclosures was enough and that should have been enough for people to make a decision?
Yeah, so good afternoon. And yes, the IT rules did create a due diligence, not only for the intermediaries, but also for digital media platforms. By particularly, I mean, when I talk in context of digital media or OTT platforms, because the context is OTT today. So due diligence in the form of code of ethics and procedures and safeguards. The fact that, as mentioned by Mitraji, yes, the medium is consumed by young people. Definitely, there is a potential serious health hazard, any glorification or any such thing being used. And hence, personally, I do believe, yes, it should be there. But simultaneously, I do also convey only in respect of those programs where such consumption is being shown and not otherwise.
So consumption is being shown on social media as well. whether it's on
No, no, no,
YouTube or
no.
on
I'm
Instagram.
I'm talking in the context of OTT platforms where you are like already aware of the content,
Correct.
and therefore anytime, in fact, any such film, I mean, there are two aspects. One, there is a film, there is a binge program.
Hmm.
So with respect to the film, yes, there should be some such communication. But once again, I'm saying only in respect of those films in which the use is being shown, use of tobacco products is being shown. Anywhere else or all the time, as soon as you open it, actually goes anti to the intent, which is what should be avoided. And
So,
that's maybe in the IT rules when it was designed, it was only meant for such specific programs. And the word which IT rules use is the drug abuse and substance abuse or abuse substance. So ideally, it should be restricted. But per se, yes, for those programs, there should be some way of communicating.
but so let's take this to social media. Social media also has depiction of smoking. It probably consumes more viewer time than streaming services do. Why is there a differential treatment
Yeah.
between social media and
So
streaming services?
yeah. So the only difference is, see, something which is where you are already aware, something where you should own the responsibility of what is being not broadcasted, what is being made available by your platform to the audience,
Hmm.
versus something where it is user generated sort of content. See, even in social media, even in respect of intermediaries, something which has a potential to create harm or something which is clearly unlawful is supposed to be communicated through terms and conditions of the platforms, as well as platforms should be willing to take them down, willing to take or maybe label or do something about it through the grievance mechanism, which is what was made available. So
Hmm.
it's not that social medias are completely exonerated and the digital media, particularly the OTT platforms, are not. So it's not like that. But definitely OTT platforms do carry maybe a higher responsibility because they are aware, and it is their material which is being shown and being consumed by the whoever is the user at that particular time.
But we never see this on television. We don't see warnings or
So
disclosures. We don't see
should I
them. We
yeah
don't see ads in the middle.
so see, as far as the rules are concerned, in 2012, when the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, through the based on the COTPA Act, came up with the rules and amendment of the rules in 2012,
Hmm.
the rules actually apply to cinema halls as well as to TV. And the rules did require all those things which today are being talked about in the context of OTT. Now, whether TV has implemented them or not is a different issue. The rules are there. So on implementation part, I'll come separately. But the rules are very clearly there and they do cover, and they have been published by Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, in spite of the fact that in 2012, it was Ministry of I&B, which was like ministry in control for such a medium like TV.
Gauri, does the health ministry even have the power to impose these regulations?
In my view, in the current construct in which they have imposed, at least my personal view is no, because the act under which they are, created these rules, right?
Hmm.
And the overall mandate is on the advertisement, right? When we say advertisement, and this is what, unfortunately, I mean, the Delhi High Court also has held what I'm going to say right now, but
Hmm.
unfortunately, that order has been stayed by the Supreme Court, and last 2 decades, this litigation is ongoing, right, on this particular point. So essentially, if you're looking at control of the advertisement, and that is how the from a public health perspective, that is how the health ministry tried to get the power, right?
Hmm.
So if you're looking at from that perspective, in my view, only showing consumption without a brand
Hmm.
visible is not an advertisement. The word advertisement has to be read in the context that you're advertising a product, right? Even with the Consumer Protection Act, if you see the overall construct, right? And therefore, at least in the current construct of the act and the rules, technically, they cannot impose these kind of obligations. That's a clear answer. Now, whether overall they can do something in light of public health and all that, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has said that yes, because when the orders were stayed, right, they said yes, for public health perspective, some of these things are required. So the legal answer is under the current construct, no. If they actually want to do it in some other construct, then we will need to see, whether they want to amend the act or otherwise. So that's the short answer for the time being. Yeah.
So I'm curious, are there like legal precedents for mandating non-skippable ads in non-broadcast digital mediums?
See, now, unfortunately, I mean, because the medium itself is different, right? So when we say non-skippable, right, let's understand practically. Now, if I'm going to a theater, there is no question of that I can skip. Similarly,
Actually, I sometimes go in late to skip all the ads.
exactly. So that's what I close my eyes, right? Like I said
So it's
last time.
non-skippable. Yeah, I also
Yeah,
close
so
my
it's
eyes.
non-skippable for me. As Mitraji was saying that it's a choice. He said, I will look elsewhere, right? So you are mandating a platform or a broadcaster or a theater owner to do all these things, but you are not, you can't force a user to keep the eyes open, to put it very simply, right? So in my view, this non-skippability technically applies to the digital medium because there is an ability to skip. Right now, even for that matter, television, technically, there are sort of different ways in which you're consuming TV today, right? So technically, there is still could be a possibility there, but the question is that from a non-skippable perspective, from a OTT platform, or the way they have said, right, when you open the OTT platform, or so that's a completely technologically different requirement that that is being imposed, which technically today that is now the not the OTT, the way the OTT platform functions, right? So technically, other mediums it doesn't apply. It applies to the digital medium, but the way today it operates, that is a change of technology for the platforms, essentially.
Arun, is this change better than last year's? Are these draft rules better than the rules that were imposed last year? How did we get here?
On how we got here, I think I'll just give a little background to my reporting on the genesis of this whole thing. It is largely driven by the Tobacco Control Unit of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. And the effort started sometime a couple years ago internally, where someone had this idea, and the person who pushed for it internally was a consultant at that time. And they moved it up on e-file and said, and the health secretary had questions. He's like, hey, is any other country doing this? Do we have precedent for imposing something like this? And the response was, no, we will be the first country. We'll be a global leader in having warnings on OTT platforms for tobacco. And this came as a bit of a surprise to not just I think the streaming industry for a little bit. I mean, they had a few weeks notice, but it also came as a surprise to the IT ministry and the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And they had a few meetings, but eventually they proceeded with the notification. And this is something that I reported, is that most streaming services did not really go for a full-throated implementation, in the sense that the notification was still in place, but it varied. On JioCinema, for instance, you do see some shows have a watermarked smoking warning, but I'm not sure if the video in the middle or in the beginning is implemented. It wasn't when I last checked. Netflix, for instance, has a little popover warning on the top left, which is the same tech they use for displaying age ratings, for instance, right? So you have a whole range of implementations which are not in line with the text of the original order. To my mind, the new order is not that much better. In fact, it introduces the requirement that once you switch on the streaming platform in the first place, you have a 20-second unskippable warning. And
So
yeah.
Arun, as a user, can you illustrate an experience for us? How would you, for example, you have a show you want to figure out what to watch.
Yeah.
How would your experience be now if these guidelines were in place?
So if I wanted to watch something or even figure out what I wanted to watch,
You want to first figure out what you want to watch, right?
yeah. So immediately I settle down. If I am lucky enough to have a TV, I settle down, I open the app, and then I have to wait for 20 seconds. And these are experiences that this is something that internet companies worry about a lot, right? Is that how quickly can we drop you into the experience? And so you create a 20-second kind of speed breaker there. And odds are, if you are an adult and you watch things made all around the world, the content you're going to watch is going to have tobacco consumption featured in it at some point, which means that you uniformly apply that warning across all episodes of that content, right? And so you have another 20 seconds when you have made a decision. And so you have essentially set yourself back 40 seconds for something that is essentially like an impulse decision that you're making, right? And it's not the greatest thing to go through as a consumer, I feel, which is also why I don't think it has been implemented, even though it's in writing required right now.
So let's say I want to figure out what I want to watch. Let's say launch Jio Cinema. I say look at, for example, True Detective. Press by the time when I log in, I get 20 seconds when I press, or 30 seconds. When I press play, I get another 20,
Yeah.
30 seconds.
And then when you reach the middle of the episode, you get another 20.
A few seconds in, I realize, hey, I don't really want to watch this. Let me go and watch Suits on Netflix. So I switch that, move to Netflix. Again, when Netflix loads, another 20 seconds. So the process of selection breaks.
Absolutely.
And so for anyone who's trying to figure out what they want from the thousands of movies that they want to watch, it breaks. Is this going to then move people to piracy?
I believe so.
That's
yes.
a much smoother experience, right?
Absolutely. I believe that to be true specifically because in terms of certain titles, right, the featuring of the appearance of tobacco varies widely. So if you're watching something like a period drama, or if you're watching even something like True Detective, which is not set that long ago, but long enough ago that more adults were smoking, you are going to see that floating watermark on the bottom right for a significant portion of your runtime, right? And you're, as a paying customer, you might tell yourself that, hey, this is not what I signed up for, right? And that's pretty much where a consumer is going to be. But I feel like that Indian consumers are still a little resilient when it comes to obstructions in their viewing experience. I don't know how big of a speed breaker this continues to be, because we still have channel logos on television,
but
for instance.
that's just the watermark. I'm just talking about the 20 and 30-second interruptions that keep happening. Wanted to check with Rahul on this. Like, filmmakers often use tobacco imagery as a part of the character building. So how do you feel about these new rules impacting the narrative flow of your work?
See, we of course use a whole lot of things, why cigarettes, to build a character, because when we often say that, wow, what a story, what a movie, or what a series, or whatever, we essentially the characters engage us, and it's the trajectory of the character. And in order to build that, in the writers' room, there's a whole lot of discussion happening. He could be loving a pet, or he could be smoking, or he could be whatever, So that's the characteristic of a character. Now, consciously, as a filmmaker, we can take a decision. For instance, I remember, when development on Sai Bibi Gangster, all the 3 parts that are produced, was happening. I remember telling my crew and my writers and all very clearly that let's go slow, because see, the theme, I got an adult rating because my theme was adult. But if you go back and watch those movies, you won't find unnecessarily cuss words, in for that matter, in any of my films, most of my films, because I feel that there is so much more that you can do with a character other than abusing or vulgarity. And I've actually given statements in the media that I don't need sex to sell my movies, or so similarly you don't need. But see, if there is, but still we have to create a world, right?
Hmm.
If in to create a world, because the audience has to get into the world, and that's how the story works. That's how the character works. So if we are too conscious of the fact, no, he cannot be smoking or she cannot be smoking, that is definitely harming. I can understand that you can have some sort of a responsibility. I understand that, but end of the day, as filmmakers, we're not essentially here to educate people. I mean, there are so many other mediums to do that. There's schools and colleges and parents and books and your own virtues and ethics and all. Why only entertainment? Our job is essentially not to educate. Our job is to satiate our creativity or whatever that we want to do, and more importantly, entertain people, entertain the audience. That is the primary purpose. So, so like I said, yes, imagery has been used. In fact, some of my actor friends told me that it's easy for them to have some prop in their hand. Somebody would probably have. I mean, I've also acted. I don't know if you and I was appreciated in Chamkila when I played DSP Bhatti. And I remember Imtiaz telling me that, sir, when you enter, I'm just going a little off track, but I'm track, but I'm just trying to make a point here. That there is this cop and Diljit enters that scene, and I'm sitting, and I'm somebody who's not even looking up. And all I did was I did this to my file and I look up. So what I'm saying is that and that was really appreciated, my one scene, and I got so many good reviews. So what I'm saying is I had a file, I had some props, I had grown a beard. That was the demand for a character. I had a turban. So I can't say, no, I will not grow a beard. I can't have a turban. If the audience liked my role, I have to create that world. So similarly, at times, actors because they want to use their hands in a particular way, or that builds on a character. So cigarettes can be or are used. And I understand that earlier, especially when we were kids and all that, we would watch and it would look very cool and all that. But right now, everybody knows that cigarettes are unhealthy. There is generally a awareness that people have. But my point here is that what is not good for public health? There are so many things that are not good for public health. Sugar is not good. Sugar also kills. Misogyny is not good for public health. Social injustice is not good for public health. So what do we do?
There've been a spate of movies depicting violence against women, especially domestic violence in the last couple of years. So I'm just curious about what do you think is next? In the sense, will we have the entire movie where, let's say, we're in an era of complicated characters rather than just good and evil, right? The anti-hero is also uh, uh, was amplified by streaming shows or binge watch shows over the last decade or so. So I'm just curious about what else we are likely to see. Are there other ministries that might, how will that impact your narrative process then?
See, that is exactly my point. What I'm trying to say is that I don't remember whom to attribute this proverb or this quotation to, but we often, I remember reading it and I believe in it, that we often profit from those who don't speak well. I mean, what not to do is something that we understand. So if somebody is smoking and in a scene, and rather than displaying that, and he's unhealthy and we're showing him that, or he's going to die soon or whatever, that'll probably serve a much more effective way of telling that smoking is bad or others are bad. So if domestic violence is shown, as long as it's not glorified, that's my point. So glorification, that is the responsibility of filmmakers. And that's the responsibility of the writers. That is the responsibility of people who are involved in the creative, not to do that. To answer your point, I recently, sometime back, watched a show which I know the director very well. And in that show, there is a woman, I don't like to tell you which show it is because they'll be like really hitting below the belt. So, but I'll just try to make my point here that there's a woman, she's having an argument with the anti-hero, and she comes out of the room, and this guy kicks her on her backside, and she literally goes flying. And when I saw that, it was a little, I mean, it was like a jerk moment for me. Why? Because I'm a sensitive person. I feel I am a sensitive person. So I thought that, and because I know the guy and I know the writers, and I understood that this is a little bit of a regressive writing. What I'm saying is, kill that woman, stab her, or do whatever. The thing of hitting her like that and she goes flying. So, like I said, if I could feel that, and then I checked up with a few other people when I was speaking at a women's lit fest, they felt the same. So, what I'm saying is that as long as I can see something and decide it is up to me. How do I take that? If somebody's so let it be self-regulatory also. How much can we regulate? Gauri made a point, or Arun, somebody made a point that end of the day, yeah, Gauri, I remember, she said that we can't force the viewer to watch the movie. She shuts her eyes, and I look the other way. So what is the point? As long as communication is not effective, it doesn't mean anything. And also there is a limit to how much you can educate the viewers on the perils of society and whatever is harmful for public health. For heaven's sake, everybody knows today. People are much more smarter. I think the young generation knows it all.
Arun, what do you think is next? Just in terms of more messaging from the government in the middle of shows.
So
and should we, if there's a line to be drawn between public interest or using private platforms for pushing public interest and viewer, and between that and the rights of platforms, the rights of filmmakers, and the freedom of viewers to choose.
Yeah.
What should that line be?
Okay, so the first question was about the. Can you just say the first part again?
What's next?
Yeah, so thankfully that is not a hypothetical, because we have a precedent in theaters of these of scope creep, right? Which is a nice problem we have in other tech policy discussions. So initially we had the smoking warnings on the bottom right, and one fine day, the government of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, both of them, said, "Hey, we can use this for drinking as well, right? Because liquor consumption is a big social problem." And so both the state governments passed laws saying that, okay, every movie that is made here needs to carry this warning. Now, normally the CBFC is a union, like film certification is a union subject. So I'm not sure what jurisdiction they have to pass those laws, but the censor boards, regional offices in Chennai and Thiruvananthapuram, they said, okay, fine. We will implement this law and we will require these warnings. And soon that started extending to drug control. So you have movies that are especially edgy. You have scenes with marijuana, you have scenes with other narcotics, and these warnings have started coming in as well, right? In Urta Punjab, we had a few of these warnings. Even in
go back to Mr. India, there was gambling.
Yeah, right. So, and sometimes all three of these kind of come together, right? Strange Darling, if I remember well, has had somewhat larger warnings in terms of font size than usual. So you had these three warnings kind of come together. And Buckingham Murders, which is bilingual, Hindi and English. So it had one scene where you had someone who was drinking and someone else was smoking in the same frame. So you had bilingual warnings on both sides of the screen. And these are not hypotheticals. This is kind of appearing in our cinemas and in our TVs today, right? In Ullurikku, which is a really, really good Malayalam movie, there is a kind of a dream sequence featuring domestic violence. And again, you had, I don't know, that was a voluntary warning, if I remember correctly, but the fact that they felt compelled to put it in that, hey, domestic warning is against the law, it attracts this kind of penal punishments. So the fact, normally I would think that, okay, a slippery slope argument would be fallacious, but we have been slipping on this slope for a few years already, right? So I think maybe it's not just the health ministry that says, hey, we were able to regulate OTT platforms without any clear thing. Tomorrow, NCB will write to the health ministry and say, hey, can you amend this to include stuff for drug consumption as well? Completely within the range of possibilities also, and it is backed up by what has happened also. On the second part of your question, where should we draw the line? I think this line should have been drawn far earlier in terms of an encroachment into creative and commercial spaces by the government, right? That in itself is a bit of a red line that is far from a settled matter, because the rules for theatrical smoking warnings is still languishing in the Supreme Court. There has not been a definitive ruling there yet. And again, we should think about this issue in terms of the extent of the problem also when we are talking about public health, right? I'll just wrap up here in a bit. So I'm going to read out a line from a Ministry of Health official, which is that tobacco use has decreased among the young population in the past decade from 14.6% in 2009 to 8.4% in 2019. This indicates that our tobacco control policies are on the right track. Now, that official that I just quoted is the person who has signed off on both this year's notification and last year's notification, right? And the studies that they were referring to was the Global Youth Tobacco Survey. And in that survey, you saw that tobacco use is a wide range of things, right? So in 2009, the 14.6 that they were referring to, less than a third of that was cigarette consumption. And that's the number one thing that you see warnings for, right? So you have these two things. You have an encroachment of, public health messaging or, imposed speech on commercial creative spaces, which is for two separate reasons I feel abhorrent. And you have a winning war that kind of screams the opposite of urgency, leading to decisions like this, right? So we also have to think about how scientific these decisions are, because when you are scientific, you iterate. In the theaters, the same approved video messages have been shown for the last decade or so. So there are 3-4 set videos that have been playing. Now, if this were a scientific exercise, you would have a new ad every year. You would be looking at how is this ad working out? How are people viewing this? So this, I feel, is like a kind of encroachment that should have never been entertained in the first place. And I think Anurag Kashyap tried to push back against it unsuccessfully with Ugly. But that effort kind of took more time than he had to release the movie. And again, still pending at the Supreme Court. So that's where I think the line should be.
Gauri, just to continue on the scope creep portion, are you seeing any signals that they could discuss either extend to the other platforms like social media and gaming, or even gaming, because online games also have characters smoking sometimes? Do you see any scope creep taking place in terms of the tobacco warnings being pushed elsewhere, or do you see more warnings or more ministries that might come in? And what's the regulatory framework available for this right now? Or is it that we are seeing that rules are being made and then, you can go to court and challenge them if you want, but we are making the rules and you have to follow until the court strikes it down?
Right. So no, you're absolutely. I know. I want to echo the last part. Unfortunately, we are seeing that more and more. That whilst the ministries probably may already know that what they are doing is ultra virus or unconstitutional, but they want to sort of make a point sometimes, right? And let it continue while it lasts is an attitude sometimes you may see also, right? Unfortunately. Now coming to the overreach overall, recently I came across there is some discussion around road safety ministry trying to impose some kind of a safety warnings in the theaters or something like that. There was some discussion around that. So as Mitraji was saying, that if each ministry wants to use the available mediums to communicate all their messages, right, the entire essence of an entertainment medium is being overtaken, by as a messaging medium, right? So I think that overreach is something we need to sort of seriously reconsider. At the same time, I also feel that there is too much expectation from a private parties to do everything good in the society, right? You have seen the Reserve Bank of India, doing their own messaging, do not share OTP, right? Now they could have imposed that on all the platforms, all the fintech platforms and all that, give this video messages and all of that. RBI said, I'm going to take control of this situation. I will create amazing, short messages which you can see as advertisements during the break. It is not like if somebody is imposing that this message should be given or otherwise, because both television and theater, they do have ads. Even online, right? AVOD platforms exist where you have ads, right? So could you not create a mechanism where ad is being used as a government ad? And I think recently, government also created a social media policy of its own, where it will, and Mr. Maheshwari may be, more aware in terms of its implementation, but, messaging of their own on various platforms rather than expecting private parties to do it. So when you, Nikhil, talk about overreach, I would also want to say that something, if the government feels that it is their duty to take control of the situation of public health, that only by messaging this is going to happen and all of that, then why are they pushing it, to the private parties to take control? I mean, to sort of come, do it. And we have seen like consumer ministry, Raho Jago, right? It's a very amazing kind of campaign they have implemented, right? So in my view, there should have been other mode and medium, or rather other mechanism through which, this kind of messaging should have been taken, by the health ministry, in their control, and done it as the other ministries have done it. Coming to your point, Nikhil, on specific point on whether, now the ministry will say, okay, now it can go, you should also do on a social media and all that. I hope nobody's listening from the government on to this question, but that is something, if they really, because they have already gone ultra virus, the act, right? So they could impose to say that, hey, these social media platforms, we are seeing proliferation of this sort of content. Then, the social media platforms should do, as a part of due diligence, some messaging in between, sort of as a, when you open the social media, that particular platform, you should have that kind of a warning, right? So that kind of overreach, and even within the current rules, I think yesterday, day before, Nikhil, you and I spoke, even within the current rules, they are going beyond, from a content perspective also. Now, even for children's content, this messaging has to come. Why should it come, right? So I think there hasn't been a complete thought process. And I want to echo what Mitraji said. There is a that we say in even in a, from a data protection law perspective, what you say, consent fatigue, right? So this messaging fatigue, which is, the same message that Arun said, same that, 2-3 videos you see every time, right? It your eyes are, have become dead to that message, right? So I think the overall approach, and whether that message even works, you already have a message on the packet, on the cigarette packet, right? When I'm buying, don't I know, this lungs are going to get affected? I know, right? So is it even, is there empirical evidence to demonstrate that, any of this has even worked? We don't know. And in spite of that, this danger, as you point out, Nikhil, I'm equally worried about it, of this constant overreach to sort of use a private party platform, private party, mechanism to, push on them to do this public messaging. I think that itself is delegation of their own, responsibility, in my view, government's own responsibility, if at all they believe they want to take control of public health.
Uh, Mr. Maheshwari, I wanted to just check with you about one aspect. These regulations seem to be very prescriptive in terms of, say, every time you open a platform, there should be something. Every time you start a show, there should be a 20-second. And I think adding an on-screen warning is the least intrusive, perhaps, as compared, or the least disruptive of an experience, perhaps. Although if there are constant warnings that are going to come in, I'm just curious about whether, in your opinion, the ministry could have uh, taken a more directional approach um, instead of being so prescriptive that you must do this for this number of seconds. I mean, if you think about it, there's something that the Ministry of IT is also struggling with in terms of verifiable parental consent, that they put the word verifiable there. So now there needs to be a manner in which consent has to be verifiable, which might end up being prescriptive, because how else would you verify? I'm just curious about whether we could have been less prescriptive. And if that were the case, what is the shape the regulations could have taken in a manner that was not so specific?
Yeah, so there are two things. See, one is, in fact, the way I do believe the ministry per se has gone a bit beyond what they should have done. Definitely, this much of prescription as well as the scope, both the things were in my own view, and last year also I had mentioned that ideally, I mean, for such kind of things, particularly last year when they came up with the rules, there was no such discussion which ever happened. Ideally, it should, because of the variety of issues which I mean any ministry would love to put and maybe to do campaign in all such contents. Ideally, therefore, the control should be with MIB, which now that the 2020 and 2023 AOBR have very clearly conveyed, the only thing is maybe MOHFW, because of the fact that their 2012 rule went through, their 2023 rules was never withdrawn, and they still believe as if this is being implemented, and that's why they have come up with one more such, I'll say, draft version and then such an amendment.
But so the 2023 rules actually came out even when the allocation of business rules had been done.
But 2020 was already there.
Correct. So then
only thing is,
why didn't MIB push back?
I had mentioned at that time also that ideally MIB should have pushed back. Ideally, MIB should have pushed back the 2012 rules. When they have been in place, now whatever is the scenario, I mean, at the judicial level, the fact remains that they are in place for last 12 years. And that is where you tend to believe that maybe whatever we are doing is correct, is rational. So maybe there is I'll say, perception or maybe sense of you being right is there. So that's one thing which is wrong. And the second thing which I want to convey is, see, ideally any ministry for that reason should think of the implementation and enforcement part of it. So if something cannot be implemented, cannot be enforced, because here also, one, whether it is desirable, because in any case, I'm clearly of the view that in all such only in those contents where maybe there is some such depiction that there should be some such way of giving warnings. And in any case, we have to see the enforceability as to how are we going to enforce it. You have suggested an interministerial committee. Yeah.
So just in terms of enforcing, this is, as Rahul mentioned earlier, this is also going to be enforced on children's content.
No, so
I mean, if a child is watching,
I do believe the right senses will prevail.
I mean, you can't
it will not be at the start of every program.
4-year-old.
It will not be a start of. In fact, I agree, completely agree. It will not. I hope it should be pruned, and definitely, I mean, much more pruned, particularly with all such contents where there is no such element. It actually unnecessarily creates interest and maybe as to what this is. So actually it can go negative, anti so instead of an anti-tobacco, it will be anti emotions, and it will go anti to the very intent of the law. But having said so, I was coming to the enforcement part. So if we cannot really enforce it and enforce it on all, I do believe it has to be proportional. It has to be proportional. There can be binge watching. I completely, once again, there also I am completely against it, because I can definitely consume all the 10 episodes in one go, 4 episodes in one go. I should not be forced upon seeing.
So I think Mr. Maheshwari's connection may have been impacted, or mine has been impacted. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, Mr. Maheshwari's has been impacted.
Okay, we'll wait for him to return. But I wanted to check with Rahul about this. That, first, do we agree that there is a need for some warning to be shown? I'm just curious about what your ideal situation is, where there is a kind of a balance that is found, in the sense there is an argument that filmmakers must accept certain regulatory constraints in exchange for the social influence and the wide reach that their content enjoys, um, and some amount of public sort of good may be imposed. Firstly, do you agree with that notion? And what would be an ideal outcome for you here?
See, drawing from what Mr. Maheshwari was saying, that, he was talking about implementation, that why make something that will later on have problems in implementing. So just taking a thread out from there, I think, imagine if every smoker going to, to buy, before he buys a cigarette, it is mandatory for him to first listen to a 30-second audio visual at the shop. Okay, he has to listen with headphones or whatever. And then after that, he's supposed to smoke there only. And when he's half the cigarette, when he's just enjoying his smoke or whatever he's doing with his cigarette, and then he cannot have the next puff, because he or she will have to then listen to another non-skippable audio-visual thing, and only after that he can have a drag. And once he's about to get finished, just before the last drag, he again is. What do you think is going to happen? I just hope that this is implemented. Probably a lot of smokers will be dissuaded this way.
People will probably buy packs instead of loose cigarettes then,
No,
which is
then
another regulatory intervention which could have been made, but it's not made. One other, I mean, you can also, why isn't it that every pawn shop needs to have a speaker that blares out anti-tobacco messaging as long as they are in business?
Yeah, because like Gauri rightly said, that there are warnings right there on the product of what you go, just before you're about to consume it, just before you open. I've been a smoker. I know. I used to watch that and whatever. I mean, I didn't feel very good about it, but then I said, to hell with it, because I was a smoker that time. And I left smoking. Let me tell you, I mean, you can ask a guy who smoked so actively. And how and when did I leave? When I thought that this was the only thing that had control over me. When I thought to myself that nothing controls me, and this is the only thing that controls me, and thank God nothing majorly happened to my health or whatever, and I just quit it. And it was very tough, and I'm very happy of the fact that I was able to quit it. So it was not thanks to those warnings, for sure, or some ad and all that, because those ads, I'm sorry to say, they're not even aesthetically done. They're not even creative ads, for heaven's sake. And I just hope in this process there are some creative ads that are, or a campaign that is, that comes about, that is at least engaging, which tells a person the ill effects of smoking. There are lots of other ways, not this way, for sure.
We also thanks, Al. I'm going to come to Shahana and then Shashidhar. I also have more questions, but before that, I wanted to allow or give Mr. Maheshwari the opportunity to complete his point. We got interrupted, sir.
Yeah, sorry. I mean, problem was at my end. I hope I'm audible.
Loud and
So
clear, sir.
I was just talking about the enforcement, and that's where ideally we should make only that much of a law regulation which can be reasonably enforced. And it is at this point, maybe whatever mechanism is being talked of, once again, who will take the lead is important. IMC is being talked of. There is one member from health, one member from IT, one member from MIB. Now, let us say there is a non-compliance. Now, non-compliance means against the COTPA Act, which Gauri has already mentioned, that we have already gone much beyond what the law prescribes and law can actually enable. So if there is a non-compliance, what do we do? There is no provision of fine. What is that we will like to? I mean, we can just issue a warning to the platform. Because there will be larger platforms maybe willing to or wanting to comply. There will be so many smaller platforms, maybe which are otherwise running on social media channels or maybe running from outside. Either way, they will all, ideally, it should apply to all then. And this is where we will end up creating a difference between the larger one. The more responsible will always be, in fact, impacted or will be punished more, which is what goes against the law itself. And the second is, I still believe why TV could not be enforced, because the mechanisms were not clear. In cinema halls, maybe because the licensing terms and conditions are there and maybe the local police authorities are having the authority, it's possible. In this particular medium, maybe with respect to OTT, the MOHFW will not be the appropriate government. And that too, the scope of an appropriate government is to ask for removal, not ask for giving an ad or giving such type of ad. So left to me, ideally it should be MIB, and I believe MIB should take a lead and should take a pragmatic view. But unfortunately, I mean, I simultaneously put a responsibility on the online platforms, particularly the online news platforms, courtesy whom we lost 9-1 and 9-3. So practically, we have cut the hands of MIB in terms of what they were supposed to regulate the OTT
So
platforms.
what is 9-1 and what is 9-3?
9-1 of the IT rules section. I mean, Rule 9-1 of IT rules mandates that the platforms, digital media platforms, will follow the code of conduct and some ethical code of conduct. And 9-3 was meant to create a tier 3 mechanism. Tier 1 and Tier 2 was predominantly a self-regulation mechanism. And Tier 3 was where government will also have a say. But because both these, in fact, rules have already been stayed by the Mumbai High Court, followed by Chennai High Court, that practically MIB has been left with no powers to be able to, I mean, anybody who is doing of their own is very good, but is MIB really doing, and can MIB really enforce anything on OTT as of today other than Rule 16 of 69A blocking in terms of certain types of contents? They practically have nothing in their I'll say, bouquet in respect of such OTT platforms. And that is where we have directly or indirectly strengthened the hands of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. I mean, time and again, we have been strengthening. But I do believe that based on this conversation, and hopefully based on certain inputs being made by submissions made by various stakeholders, the scope is I'll say, highly reduced and is made only in those such cases where it is actually impacting. That too, I completely agree with Rahulji that maybe the means and ways of communicating has to be relevant to the kind of audience that is there and to the size of the program that is being shown. So proportional to all of them. So that's all I mean for the time being.
I think Gauri's made a point in the comments that in IT rules is a provision that if misuse of tobacco is being shown, that content requires a higher age rating. And so therefore the content that these health warnings should not be shown to children, and the rules, but the present rules require that such content be shown to children as well. I'm just curious, Gauri, about how you think this might cover live streaming. Because if you look at it, uh, let's say if I'm watching a football match and there's a half that's 45 minutes long, um, or in some cases you're watching an entire match because there's no break in the middle, um, and so does this apply to that as well? Like, would you have to see tobacco warnings while watching a live sports program? There doesn't seem
That's
to
a
be
good
any exclusion,
question.
right?
Yeah, that's a good question. In fact, when it applies to television, if I remember correctly, there are exclusions for live streaming. So
Hmm.
that clarification has not been provided for the online, because I think they have not contemplated live streaming online, because a lot of television channels also can be taken live online, right? So for the television channels, one can argue that it automatically applies, but now the OTT platforms are also doing live streaming, right? So technically, they should have that exclusion by the same logic that we have for television.
And it's not like the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare didn't have enough time to consider these aspects, given that the
Yeah,
last version came out last year.
correct. And I don't think they have even understood the medium, if you ask me, if with due respect. The way MIB and IT ministry understood the medium, and that is how they created the rules. I don't
Hmm.
think all ministries have understood that medium. That, for example, even when we saw the advertisement issue, when the Supreme Court mandate came under Patanjali, right? The chaos that it created for that online advertisement, right? So I think several stakeholders need to understand the medium to be able to impose appropriate regulations, if at all. I
It's
don't
almost
want
as if,
them
from
to
a regulatory standpoint, we're moving into a paradigm where the rules are being issued
yeah,
without much thought or consideration given to aspects, especially, for example, the way MIB initially implemented. I don't agree with the current status in terms of those online advertising guidelines also.
yeah,
But even if this was left to MIB, it's not very clear whether they would have done a better job than what the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare is doing, given how ignorant they seem to be when they imposed the regulations on online advertising,
correct,
uh, especially when there are like a large part of online advertising is now being auto-created, where
correct,
text is being edited. So with billions of ads across billions of platforms, the
correct.
same thing applies here as well.
And same thing applies. And the other thing, Nikhil, is more at a policy level, right? If when see for let's understand, even from a community, the business community perspective, right? Once they know that one ministry, so the problem today is that we look at government as a whole, right? But unfortunately, each ministry works in their own perspective, right? So what happens is, if the industry is aware that, okay, the government has understood our medium to be a different medium, right?
No,
Then
but even in 2017, Gauri, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare admitted that the implementation of the tobacco
TV, even
rules
on
on
TV,
television
correct,
is not being fully implemented
correct.
there because of challenges there.
That's
So,
exactly the point, right? So when at a policy level, when you recognize a particular medium, understand a particular medium, then that knowledge has to be across the board, and then all your policies, whichever ministry the policy it may be, all your policies should have that consistency of an approach for that medium. That's the short point I'm trying to make, which you don't see that consistency.
thanks, Gauri. I'm going to bring in Shahana Chatterjee, who's a partner with the Public Policy and Regulatory Affairs team at Shadol Amarchand Mankaldas and Co. Shahana, you're you wanted to make some points on these
Yes.
regulations as a discussion. Thank you for joining us for this discussion.
Thank you, Nikhil, for having me, and it's been a fantastic discussion. There are just a couple of things that I wanted to raise as points of consideration for all of us. One is that, I want to encourage us to take a step back and think about, when did we decide that public disclosures is the best way to get folks to give up smoking, right? Because that seems to be the rationale behind the manner in which you want to control advertisement and sale of tobacco products and cigarettes, etc. That you don't want it to come into the hands of impressionable, members of the community, i.e., children, and you want to spread that awareness to ensure that everyone knows that smoking kills, right? So I was very curious about why and when did we decide that this seems to be the only mechanism available to the government to promote people giving up smoking. The health ministry is the same ministry that is the administratively in charge of COTPA. It is the same ministry that has not approved a tobacco cessation drug in the last 2 decades. There are 2 nicotine replacement therapy drugs in the market available in India, which have been around for 2 decades. Nothing has been approved beyond that. Rest of the world has moved on to newer products. This is the same ministry that banned electronic nicotine products, but has not been able to enforce it in any meaningful way. This is the same ministry which put in place under the COTPA rules, requirements for television programs that we've been discussing, for television programs to have the same disclosures, to have the same disclaimers, but has not been able to implement it. I was looking at some data and I was extremely surprised by a couple of things. One is that there really seems to be a lack of India-based surveys or studies that actually create that evidence of these sorts of disclaimers and disclosures actually dissuading people from smoking, right? There seems to be very, very little study around that, which made me curious about why the ministry is so focused on this as the only mechanism for persuading folks to give up smoking. And why are they so focused on the OTT platform? So I appreciate their argument when they say that, listen, there is a certain proliferation of OTT content, is very popular amongst a certain demographic. I appreciate that. But then you really start to wonder, like Gauri and like, Rahul have been talking about, whether there has been also any appreciation of the fact that the content on these platforms are consumed very differently. The user interaction with this content is very different, right? When I go into a cinema,
Just on that, Shahana, should these regulations or can these regulations be even imposed on a non-public medium? It's a private platform being viewed privately.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there are legislative competence questions over there. I think that, Nikhil, might be a little bit of a losing argument, simply because the point to which the rules have already come, right? The rules have already imposed obligations on public spaces, on restaurants, on movies, television, on OTT, arguably. I think the point to which the regulations have come, the rules have come, have been because they are riding on the back of this being a public interest legislation and not so much a public health legislation. I think if this had been really curated on the back of this being a public health issue, I think there would have been much easier pushback in terms of legislative competence to how far the rules have come. But I think because this legislation and this framework is being treated as a public interest issue, this slip slide has been permitted, or the slide has happened. So I think the question, more than the question about whether this should be imposed on certain types of platforms or not, I think the question really should be is that what is the point of this sort of imposition of obligation, right? Where is the evidence that backs that these sorts of disclaimers will actually be effective? Where is the evidence that backs that what they have already tried to impose in film and in television has been effective? There is no evidence. And so you really begin to wonder that why is this fixation on this particular mechanism when you have all of these other options available to the same ministry at the central government to try and encourage folks from giving up tobacco and cigarette products. So it's a bit of a wonder. The other question that that you have been asking and that the panelists have really discussed really interestingly has been that if not this, then what? Right? So if we generally agree that there must be some sort of an obligation imposed on content that glorifies the use of cigarettes or tobacco products, if we generally agree as a society that that is something that is desirable, we don't want the glorification of the use, then automatically the response to that has to be a much more refined and nuanced response. It has to be refined in its expectations. So we cannot have disclaimers at the beginning of every piece of content. And I know that one of the points of contentions for us when we were looking at this is that it talks about all content, right? So we're not just talking about movies or serials online. We're talking about all content. And so we certainly need a refinement of the mechanism itself. We certainly need
So what's the refinement that you want to see?
That we respect the fact that OTT content is consumed differently, that the more relevant stakeholders in that are the publishers and the users. And we leave a little bit of responsibility more than liability with these stakeholders to determine what is considered glorification of the use of this content, and have disclaimers. If that sort of mechanism is something that the government insists on holding on to, I don't believe that there is any data to back that as an effective mechanism. But if it is a mechanism that the government insists on holding on to, then it has to be relevant to the content. It has to be not just on content that shows or depicts the use of a tobacco product. It has to be limited to content that glorifies its use.
Okay. Arun, what's your ideal outcome? Is there a middle ground outcome, or do you think, so one, what's an ideal outcome? Two, what's a workable outcome?
So the ideal outcome for me would be for every streaming platform to send a link to their ad buying platform to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and say, "Paise ditna kalo, why should we do this for free?" I mean, that is one major thing, right? Someone actually in the Q&A was talking about, the CDC, I mean, campaigning, messaging kind of works. And I think it does work, sure. But you put the work in, right? If you're doing something for free, you are never going to invest in making it work. So the CDC's program that was quoted in the Q&A, you can go to the answer tab, essentially focuses on a few specific outcomes, which is that, okay, we want people who are already smoking to quit. We want to give them a helpline. And sure, all those, the helpline is in place. But how are you promoting it? When was the last time we saw a smoking PSA that was commercially purchased by the government, right?
So they have the budget for this, but they don't want to use it as
not only do they have the budget for this, they have the taxation on cigarettes to finance this particular line item. So it is a bit of a scandal that an ITC shareholder, one of the most major ITC shareholders, is trying to free ride essentially on on commercial platforms like this. Yeah. So, and the ideal middle ground would be for me that, look, I mean, there are ways to engage the film industry and to engage creators and kind of bring in nuance in storytelling, right? That is, I don't know how big of a role the government should play in those conversations, but sure, those conversations should happen, because hero glorification of smoking is straight out of the big tobacco playbook, right? That is something that they have paid for and that they have historically been able to arguably get some outcomes out of it. So nowadays, I don't know if this applies for other industries. In Tamil movies, it's always the bad guy that usually smokes, right? And you still see the warning. And so, I mean, we need to kind of have a solution that moves away from mandates, because this mandate is especially egregious in terms of what it is asking to do, the opportunity cost of what it is asking creators to do.
And just
And
like with other ads, Arun, should users have the ability to skip it?
sure, yes, absolutely. It shouldn't be there in the first place, but if it is, because if it's not, then,
And we have no data on the effectiveness of whatever warnings have been shown over the last year also.
exactly. And we don't have the data for the effectiveness of the warnings shown in theaters over the last 10 years, right? I mean, we have overall information that, okay, cigarette use among youth is draining, because that is a very specific goal here that we should articulate, is that
So-
this is for controlling youth initiation and continuation of smoking.
Oh, I was going to read this as you saying that this is basically virtue signaling from an ITC shareholder.
Pretty much, yeah.
Fair enough. Now that we've dissed the government and ITC enough, I'm just wondering what your ideal outcome might be. First, Mr. Maheshwari, then Rahul, and then Gauri.
See, I normally tend to take up a middle approach. Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, sir, loud and clear. You always prefer the middle approach, I know.
Yeah, so I do believe, as I have been time and again is communicating, that one, the ministry should be receptive to the ideas. Two, that where the ad is not really required should not be put up. No such communication, in fact, should be put up. And therefore, either at the beginning of the of the channel, or maybe the programs which are not really meant for, at least definitely 13 up to 13 years of age. So 16 and adult is probably where it will be required. That too only in those cases where such depictions have happened. Now, I do not know as to from a, particularly because we have the Disability Act also being in place. And very recently, the courts have also held that those subtitles should also be communicated. As to how many subtitles can actually be shown at the same time. So there can be a bit of contradiction because of all this. And it is precisely because of these reasons that simultaneously, once again, the MIB should be involved. A copy of any suggestion should as well be shared with MIB to maybe take up the lead, so that any other ministry wanting any other things to be done through such medium, there is at least one ministry which is having the overall picture and a good idea, fair idea of what can be done, regulated, implemented, enforced. Otherwise, once again, as I mentioned, I mean, no point making the law which cannot be enforced. At least by design, it should be enforceable. And in practical, it may or may not be to that an extent. But by design, when things are not working, when things have not worked for past, we must also convey, I mean, as to why exactly could it not work for TV. And TV today is also, I mean, particularly with everything now coming through the OTT kind of channels, YouTube channels, and DTH also, we have all the flexibility of seeing what we want to see. So in my view, I mean, it does not really work, should be significantly reduced in terms of scope of where it is shown, in terms of time, where for what duration it is shown, and in terms of the innovativeness and other aspects. Though I do not believe that ministry should pay. I mean, there can be one view, but practically when the glorification is also being shown by the movies, or movies have a likely potential of maybe increasing our tendency to have smoking or using other tobacco products, it's also a responsibility. It's a collective responsibility otherwise also, that maybe such products and usage of such products is dissuaded to that an extent. And just do not leave it to the ministry. We also play our role. We have something to be able to offer to the audience which is likely to be
The government
impacted.
has a very large advertising budget for public interest work. Why
Does not
shouldn't OTT
does,
players get some
no
of
no
it?
no
Maybe
no
should work
no
better.
that does not mean that the platforms should be completely absorbed. No, at least that's my opinion.
Rahul?
I think, see, cinema, as we all know, is the biggest mass communication tool that we all know of. I feel that there is so much more that can happen, can be achieved, rather than just putting a sword on our necks and saying that you go to all platforms, for instance. Why not incentivize it, for that matter? So I remember when I was shooting Bullet Raja in 2012 in Uttar Pradesh. A meeting with the chief minister just changed my mind overnight, with the fact that if you shoot make your film here, then we could maybe come with a policy or something. I'm happy to share I was the first filmmaker to get subsidy from UP for Bullet Raja. I had shot for, I don't know, more than 80 days in the state. Anyway, and which opened the state for a whole lot of shootings. Even today, I go and speak on subsidy and the power of cinema, for that matter. So what I'm saying is that
Basically, we have a stick but not a carrot.
Yeah. So what if we come with a policy, and this is an idea which has just come listening to all the lovely panelists. Why imagine the government coming out, a joint policy between Ministry of Health and MIB, that send us proposals of your films that you're making, and if there is a good branding window for this campaign of ours, creatively, don't show any ads, nothing. We need to be sure that our message is loud and clear, and you shall get, if there are 3 windows in the film, creative windows that cater to our larger interest of public health and anti-smoking, then you shall get 4 crore rupees. If there are 2 windows, you will get 2 crore rupees, and whatever. So I remember I got 1 crore for my film then. So what will happen is, then, rather than getting into this debate of what does this, and I think we said, chuck it. I'll just call in my writer's room and tell them, listen, our hero's dad was dying, right? And what was the dialogue he was saying? So that our hero in that amazing scene is saying that, "Mera baap mujhse jab vida ho gaya," whatever. He just needs to add, "Kash wo itne cigarette nahi peete. जब माँ उनको रोकती थी तो उनको रुकना चाहिए था." That is my window number 1.
I'm glad you didn't say
my window number 2 is a small kid coming home, into another scene and saying कि आज बहुत हंगामा हुआ स्कूल के बाद. क्यों? एक सिगरेट की दुकान थी, उसको तोड़ने के लिए आ गए, क्योंकि हमें पता है कि सिगरेट स्कूल के पास सिगरेट की दुकान नहीं होनी चाहिए. That's window number 2. See, I have identified 2 windows for you. So, Mr. Maheshwari, please help me get some money from the government.
Yeah. So that is in addition.
I'm glad.
So incentivization, I think
that's so innovative of you.
Yeah.
Incentivization, I feel, is very important. It will definitely help. On a serious note, I'm saying.
Yes.
Another thing is, I think few of us from the industry, or most of us, need to be. I won't be pompous enough to use the word consulted, because we are all stakeholders in public health and the upkeep of public health. We should be engaged with. We should be made to interact along with the government before making these rules, because Mr. Maheshwari said, why make a rule that is not enforceable? What is the point of making something? So policy is one that is enforced organically and beautifully and nicely, and the purpose is solved. So I think that is second. Engage with the creators, engage with the people that are mass communication tools, because we can definitely take the message far away, not only through these ads, but maybe creatively as well. That is 2. And third, I feel, is that self-regulation. So we need to be made aware also. I remember as a young journalist with the Times of India, I in a hurry to file a story, I just broke my red light. And I'm very ashamed about that, because generally I don't like to do that at all. And I was stopped by a cop, and he took me. I said, I don't want to do a channel. And I was made to watch a film for 20. He said, नहीं आपको पैसे नहीं देंगे, ठीक है, आप पैसे नहीं लेंगे, लेकिन आप ये film देखिए. And I was taken inside DCP. He ended up being a good friend of mine later on, DCP Traffic's office in Chanakyapuri. And I was made to watch this film for 30 minutes. And oh my God, it was so boring that I said, okay, that I will never ever break a red light, because I don't want to go through this. So the idea is that I think it has to be a combination of that. It's better to be loved than feared. I think we're not living in some Machiavellian politics going on here. No, you have to do this. And like Gauri said, and like Arun said, and like and Mr. Maheshwari said, I think we need to be in a situation where all of us are passionately engaged in this. एक मुहिम होनी चाहिए ऐसे, it should be a campaign that all of us should think that we should do, rather than, oh my God, this is something. So the people also know, the audience also knows who's watching, that there's some stupid rule and I cannot skip it. So either I do, if I'm Gauri, I will do this. If I'm Rahul Mitra, I will do this. What is the point? So I think it's a combination of all this, but I really, on the incentivization thing, I think it can definitely be a hit, because if there are more and more programs, more and more films happening like that. You know how many films post Bullet Raja came to UP? I don't have the statistics, but all I know is that it won me a Uttar Pradesh Gaurav Mahan Award later on for sure. So what I'm saying is that similarly, if they engage with us, A, incentivization, and B, some sort of just come and engage, rather than just putting a sword here and say that. Maybe creatively we can come out with certain very effective windows, because what cinema can do, no ad campaign can do. What is I think is the triumph of the human spirit and that emotion. Cinema is magic, and let's create some magic in raising awareness, in public awareness.
I'll go to Gauri, then Shahana, then Mr. Maheshwari. We're going to wrap up shortly, so in case anyone has any questions, please take them up.
I would have to leave in about how much time do I have? I just have a.
We have about 20 odd minutes.
Okay.
Left.
Nikhil, because Rahulji is there, I will just like to make one point. I completely appreciate what Rahulji is saying.
So before that, I'm just going to hand over to Kamya to take over.
Just one.
Kamya's taking over.
Okay.
I'll take your leave. I have a flight to catch. Actually, I'm not in the country right now. Kamya.
Yeah, sir. Go ahead. Please make your point.
Happy travels, Nikhil.
Yeah. So I'll just like to make one point. Rahulji, I mean, what you have said, and it's quite innovative, quite actually can be quite effective also. But there are two aspects which government has to simultaneously look into. One is the rule and regulation part, the way it has come. The other is the policy part and the promotion part. So on the policy promotion, which is also the responsibility of the government, is something which is what will be very, very applicable and must be looked into. But because as of today, maybe we are talking specifically with respect to the rule that has been proposed, is what we should really think of as to what changes, what suggestions that we provide to the government. Parallelly, of course, this additional suggestion, which will be equally effective and must be considered. I mean, so two sets of, in a way, communication go. What you have talked is the other set of communication as well.
Yeah. So let me quickly I echo, on all the points both Mr. Maheshwari and Mitra, they have very passionately put across. So my first, wish list is that the entire rules are scrapped, because, the matter is heard by the Supreme Court finally, and some sense prevails that, this entire rule has to go away, for all the mediums. That's my wish list. But pending that, unfortunately, as Mr. Maheshwari has said, because there is no stay of the current rules, whatever he suggested, I echo that. but I don't think that's going to solve the purpose anyway. So, sort of as an alternative to the videos playing and whatnot, right? If at all some alternative has to be provided, whether the platforms can consider providing that they also have social media handles of their own, right? So if instead of giving some videos, etc., and those social media handles are very regularly followed, by the viewers as well, right? So some messaging that can be done, as Mitraji said, very creatively, and let the manner of messaging, let it be left to the to the creative world, right? Those health, whatever you see in theaters is atrocious, I mean, to use a strong word. So instead of those kind of messaging which are not effective, which has which is not really addressing the audience of today, right? Because very rarely you will see, if youth you're talking about, very rarely you will see somebody chewing a tobacco or something like that, right? So you be little more creative and let the creative industry do their own messaging, whether that is point number 2. Point number 3, I'm not sure whether the creative community will agree with me on this, though, I'm glad that Mr. Maheshwar and Mitra have made those points, but to be more responsible by not, sort of glorifying this, any sort of vice for that matter, right? That kind of, and even if further the story demands it, right, there has to be some counter messaging to the, to the extent possible, right? So again, I don't want to control the creative community here, but it's just the overall messaging
Sure.
that you're, sort of putting out there, right?
Absolutely.
There has to be some subtle counter. I'm not saying that, you glorify the counter messaging also, right? It has to be subtle and, some kind of, statement. So that is where I think it's a combination of all these things that is going to work. If you really want to solve a problem, these rules are not going to solve the problem, or not solved the problem for last 2 decades. They have been there forever, right?
Right.
So therefore, in my view, a white canvas, a blank white canvas is required to revisit what is likely to work for the current, youth, for the current community, for the current type of messaging. There are so many newer messaging, avenues possible. So let's explore those. That's a long term. Short term, I agree with what Mr. Maheshwari has recommended, but I would, go by saying that no video playing at all on any of these. If at all social media platforms pe unko karna hai, their handles, etc., maybe just a warning should be sufficient for the time being at the top, because at the bottom you do have your subtitles coming up, right? Because of the accessibility, etc. So yeah, that's from me.
Thanks, Pari. Very quickly, I'll jump into questions. So, Dipankar has made the
Kamya, just one other point, I think, the national education policy, if I'm not wrong, also requires, at the school level, because you're talking about the youth, right? So at the school and college level, creation of awareness and all that could be also part of this wider campaign that has.
Very quickly. So, Shahana, I'll just come to you. I think Dipankar has been sitting with his points for a little while. Put them in the Q&A. Everyone else can read. I just wanted to mention one thing that he said, which could be like another suggestion to what we've been talking about so far. A small film that is played to users when they're signing their terms and conditions, and then that film is refreshed every 6 months, so they probably have to review it again after 6 months. He says that this is done when somebody gets a driving license. One needs to see a film and sign up that they've seen it. So same thing can happen here. There are other questions, but Chana, whatever point you wanted to make, please go ahead.
Okay, Kame, sorry, I'll have to leave in about 5 minutes because I've got something in.
I think there might be a question for you before you go.
Okay, I'll wait for
you
her to
talk-
finish and then I could take that question.
Yes, Shana, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll be super quick so that we can give Mr. Mitra his time. I think just as closing thoughts, I do think that we desperately need to rethink the entire requirement to have these sorts of disclaimers on content, right? Whether it is film, television, or OTT, I think we desperately need to rethink it. There was in Parliament, the MOH last year had actually given a statement saying that one of the reasons that they've come up with the 23 amendments was because OTT was unregulated. and that they have taken into consultation MeitY and MIB, right? So I think, to Mr. Maheshwari's point, that is not content regulation, and OTT being unregulated should really not be the domain of the MOH. If the focus is that it has to be cigarette and tobacco cessation, there are very many other means and ways in which that can be achieved a lot more effectively. School campaigns, I think, is a great way to do it. There was a massive reduction in use of patakas at Diwali because there were school campaigns, right? So if you are so focused about the vulnerable community and about cessation of cigarette and tobacco, then you cannot stay so focused on the types of disclaimers that are getting pushed down on, under the guise of the COTPAS. So I think those were just final thoughts, that there are so many other ways and means in which we can, achieve the same objective.
Got it. Rahul, very quickly, I think this is probably concerning you. So somebody's asked a question regarding the incentivization idea that you were talking about. How will you draw a line between incentivization for government campaigns and people and the government, whoever's in power at whatever point, using it to push propaganda for endorsement?
Push propaganda for endorsement. No, incentivization would be just of not in terms of showing a product or any brand endorsement. I am only referring to incentivization if you're showing anti-smoking in your film. That's the only point I'm saying. How creatively that's our call. So there is no confusion about that. What I'm saying is that, like film subsidy, you only get the film subsidy if you shoot for an X number of days in a state. That is the policy. You get film, and in lieu of that, the government gives you locations, etc., all that help, and gives you money. So that is the incentivization. So similarly, if I know that there is incentivization of me getting something monetarily or in kind or whatever, I don't know, that we have to work out, because incentivization has to be in kind or in material terms. There are only two ways. Then creatively we can do it. I'll just like to draw your attention to a recent campaign that I did. So I did a 50-year state campaign for Arunachal Pradesh about 2 years back. Okay, you should, whenever you have the time, you should just go and look it up. 50 years of Arunachal Pradesh, with my very dear friend, actor Sanjay Dutt. So when the government got in touch with me and I was going to do that campaign, and I'm just trying to draw that point there, I told them with folded hands that, look, I have only 2-3 requests. And this is what I told the Honorable Chief Minister that time, a very dynamic guy who incidentally is also the current chief. I said, number one, I won't be able to make the typical government kind of ads that you want. So he said, what do you mean by typical government? I said, typical which are just too much in the face, and they have to be creative, because end of the day, we need people to realize how beautiful Arunachal is and what are the resources. And two, I just did this and said, what is it? I said, I want this much of money. So I was very upfront about it, that it's going to cost this much of money and this is what it's going to do. So I got Sanjay Dutt, and if you see the campaign, it is so simple. A guy calls Sanjay Dutt on the phone, and that guy is incidentally me in the film as well. I wrote it, I shot it, I produced it. So it's like how, and Sanju and I are very close friends. So what happens if two friends, what do? I'm going for a holiday, where should I go? So Rahul Mitra calls Sanjay Dutt in that ad. Hi, Sanju, how are you? And he's saying, hi, brother. I said, I was planning to go abroad. He said, switch on your phone, come to Arunachal. And that 1.5 minute film, there are no supers, there is no voice, there is nothing. It is Arunachal Pradesh in all of that. And in the end, he says, Arunachal is amazing. So, and it was an amazing Arunachal campaign. It did wonders for all of us. So the point I'm trying to make, it is such a simple concept. There's no rocket science in it. Similarly, we can do creative stuff with advertising, because end of the day, and a very nice point was made, that why don't we target schools? If we know that is the target group, that the impressionable minds, let's go to the impressionable mind. Somebody who's not, so the aims are two. One, who's not started smoking, let's dissuade them. And second, who's smoking, that let's tell them it's harmful and you may probably die. These are the two objectives that we have to go in public. Let's divide that and devise ways. If through this wonderful discussion or medium, I would myself like to offer my services for probably creating something with some of my closest actor friends from the industry. Let's all come in, rope in, and make a campaign that should be issued in public interest, which everybody likes to watch at least. So that's the point I would like to make.
Got it.
Okay. So can I leave now?
Yeah.
Thank you so very much, and it
Thanks
was
so much.
wonderful being all the lovely panelists. Okay, and look forward discussing more on this for sure. Okay, and if there's any check comes from the government, please let me know on my incentivization proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry, I think there's a question which you could take. So somebody has asked whether these rules would also apply to shows and movies on platforms such as YouTube that are not necessarily OTT, but where the content is free.
Currently, they don't apply, as we discussed before, right? Currently, they don't apply. Sorry, one other, interesting thing, because that's an interesting question and we need to see how they do it. Because if you see the definition of publisher, right, in the IT rules, which also have been relied upon, right, the publisher includes an individual or any organization using an intermediary platform for a systematic business or commercial activity, right? So if that is the way to look at it, technically, it will be that publisher's responsibility to, probably comply with these rules. That is one way. We don't know whether the ministry has really thought about it. But if you really see the definition that,
Yes,
they have relied upon.
this will be the way. This will be the way,
it is on the publisher and not the intermediary.
So in many of the news channels, YouTube give its own ad and the news channel give its own ad. So it's not the responsibility of the YouTube here, but of the publisher.
Correct.
Using the YouTube as the medium to communicate.
Yeah, because they have relied, if you see the definitions in the explanation, they have taken the same definitions from the IT rules. And that is where even the proposed broadcasting bill, that was being discussed, also had this contemplation. So I thought I'll just clarify that part. Yeah.
Shashidhar has been waiting for a long time. I'll let him.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hi. So I have a question. Why these anti-tobacco rules are coming into place for OTT, and if the recent phenomenon of cord cutting has any role to play with it as well? Because one of the observations that I've made is that because there is a lot of cord cutting and a lot of OTT platforms are still being viewed on smart TVs, etc. There used to be a little bit of control over cable television, and even in terms of programming, etc. Right? I mean, it's well-known fact that studios and television studios, etc., used to create content for certain time slots, which would have different theme, which would have different age rating themes. So, where studios would make a conscious effort to kind of not show depictions of tobacco or something like that, and keep it for the late hour. And for around 6 o'clock or prime time, they would kind of reduce these depictions of vices, etc. as well. And so there was a bit of a acknowledgement and an agreement of how to actually show these types of content at different periods of time. But what's happened with OTT right now is because everyone has to choose what they want to watch, and it is no longer a linear programming sort of schedule. It's become a lot more harder for ministries to actually put forward these messages, and just wanted to get people's thoughts on this as well.
Did anyone want to comment on this?
Yeah, so in fact, from my perspective, the way maybe I look at it at the government, see, government is started with cinema, TV, and therefore they are looking at it from the same lens and will also like similar kind of arrangement to be extended to other mediums where such type of content is being shown. So that's their understanding, and this is precisely, I mean, where I feel that maybe those of you who deal with the policy making and maybe trying to advocate the kind of or engage with the government, this is a failure of such organizations and the teams that they should have communicated that the mechanism of what was maybe okay with cinema, with okay with TV over a period of time itself needs to be reviewed rather than to be further enforced on the new medium. So this is right now because the rules have already been put in public domain for consultation. So one of the approach many a time which can work as well is to not just, so one is in any case, people will be submitting their comment, suggestion, whatever to the government, to the bureaucracy, to the ministry, but simultaneously, I do believe that the ministers also need to be educated. I mean, whoever is the minister, Mr. Nadda is the minister as of now. I'm sure, I mean, they will be willing to listen to such kind of inputs, suggestions that this has to be reviewed holistically. And in any case, none of this was a valid, in fact, rule under the court power. So instead of just waiting and knocking the doors of judiciary, sometimes it is also helpful to maybe convince the ministers in charge, and it works.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Rana, did you want to say something as well as a...
Sorry, couldn't hear that last part.
Oh, no, this is not for you, Shashita. Shahana had her hand up a little while ago, just asking if she wanted to.
Yeah, thanks, Tamya. Yeah, I just wanted to, also kind of pick up from what Shashidhar was saying. I think Mr. Maheshwari said it beautifully. But I think one of the other things is that perhaps this whole mechanism of public disclosures was more effective because there were these other checks and balances in place when it came to films and well, films in particular, right? That you could have certain types of movies shown later at night. I remember there was a point when they used to do very serious checking of whether underage kids were going in for A-rated movies in movie halls, right? So you had these other physical things that you could do to make these mechanisms more effective. But the minute you're talking about digital content, you have to change that mechanism as well, right? Your mechanism has to respond to the nature of the content as well, and the manner in which we engage with that content. The manner in which I engage with content on social media is entirely different from the manner in which I engage with content on platforms like Netflix or Geo or Sony. And so that really has to be the crux of any mechanism, and I'm going to say any new mechanism that is thought of, because the 23 rules and the proposed amendments, I don't believe work.
Yeah, there's just one more question. If anybody else has anything, please add it to the Q&A. I don't know if anybody wants to take this up. Is there any reliable evidence regarding the efficacy of smoking awareness ads? And that's just the last thing.
Yeah, I think all of us have said that to our knowledge, there isn't any. I think to the previous question, I want to add one interesting point which I realized right now. We somehow, not we, the health ministry somehow skipped the home video, sort of, viewing. So they went from theater to television, but the video cassettes, I think, I'm not sure, but that seems to have been skipped, the CDs and all that, and we jumped directly to the digital medium Probably
So
it was a good
they
thing.
missed that technology.
It was a good
Now
thing,
that
but
we
I
have
just
made them
realized
aware.
that the ministry hasn't been that consistent also.
It is also something that is difficult to measure, right? I mean, good policy making is something where you can actually see that, okay, I'm doing this, therefore this followed, therefore this worked and this did not work. And so let's do more of this lesson.
Yeah.
How do you measure something when there is literally no way to follow up, right? I mean, you are in an information economy that is kind of just bombarding you with different things at any given point. So your views on shaping or your views on smoking and tobacco consumption are not going to be shaped exclusively by these warnings. They're going to be shaped by everything around you. So in that context, how do you even measure whether this is working? Because at that point, to continue this policy, you can only grandstand and say, look, we need to do something about this. And that is, to my mind, not a sufficient kind of basis to proceed on policy making like this. I'll have to leave now. Thank you so much, Kamya. Thank you, Nikhil. Please convey my thanks to him. It's been a pleasure chatting with all of you.
We're
I hope to catch
anyway,
the...
yeah, we're anyway closing. If,
All
I
right.
don't think there's any more questions. Thanks for everyone who participated. Thanks to the speakers. This was great. We had some very interesting comments right around the end when we asked everybody for their wish list. Just one reminder to the people who are attending, comments on this are due on October 13th. So if you're going to send them, now's the time. Tomorrow is probably the last day you can. So please do that. Yeah, that's it from me. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you, Kamyaji. Thank you, Nikhil. Thank
Thank
you, all my
Thanks
co-panelists.
for inviting. Yeah, thank you for inviting and this engaging discussion. I hope, some sense would prevail over a period of time, if not immediately. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.